This land has a story that stretches back 4,000 years, just packed with empires, religions, and competing claims. Look, our goal here isn't to solve anything, but to trace the history, to build an impartial, factual framework that might help make sense of the present. So let's dive in, right at the very beginning.
To really get this, you have to rewind the clock, way back. We're talking 4,000 years, long before Israel and Palestine were even words on a map. We start in a place called Canaan, which was this patchwork of city-states and different tribes living all across these hills and valleys.
All right, so for this first part, we're going to move pretty quickly through a few thousand years of history. The whole point is to see just how many different peoples and empires have ruled this land, creating layer after layer after layer of history.
And here's where we see the first major political power start to take shape in the region. The early Israelite tribes, they come together, they form a monarchy, which pretty soon splits into two separate kingdoms. You've got Israel up in the north and Judah down in the south, with Jerusalem as its capital.
But you know, just as quickly as they formed, these kingdoms fell. Control of this area became a revolving door for massive empires. First, the Assyrians sweep in. Then come the Babylonians, who destroy the first temple. They're followed by the Persians, who actually allow it to be rebuilt, and then the Greeks under Alexander the Great, and finally, the Romans. Each one left a huge mark.
Okay, this is a really key moment. After a series of Jewish revolts against their rule, the Romans had had enough. In 135 CE, they crushed the last major uprising, and in a move to really assert their dominance, they renamed the province from Judea to Syria Palestina. That name is going to have consequences for centuries to come.
And after the Romans, well, the parade of empires just kept on going. The Byzantine Empire brought Christian dominance. Then the Islamic caliphates introduced Arab rule and the Arabic language, which fundamentally shaped the region's culture. You had brief periods where European crusaders took control, then the Mamluks from Egypt, until finally the Ottoman Empire takes over in 1517, and they would rule for the next 400 years.
Okay, so let's fast forward a bit. As the huge Ottoman Empire starts to weaken in the 19th century, something new and powerful starts to bubble up, a force that would really define the conflict we know today, modern nationalism.
And this really gets to the core of it. Two completely distinct national movements started growing at roughly the same time in the exact same place. On one hand, you had Zionism, which was born in Europe and was all about establishing a Jewish homeland in the historic land of Israel. And at the exact same time, a local Arab nationalism was growing, one with deep, deep roots in the land and culture of Palestine.
Then World War I happens, and everything changes. Great Britain, hoping to get Jewish support for the war, issues something called the Balfour Declaration. It says Britain supports the idea of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. But it also includes this crucial line, promising to protect the rights of the existing non-Jewish communities. And that promise? Well, that would prove to be incredibly difficult to keep.
So with the Ottomans out of the picture after the war, Britain was given a mandate to govern the territory. And this period saw a huge spike in Jewish immigration, a lot of people fleeing persecution in Europe. As you can imagine, tensions with the local Arab population started to escalate dramatically.
Eventually, Britain basically threw up its hands, unable to handle the violence, and passed the problem to the brand new United Nations. In 1947, the UN came up with a solution, the Partition Plan. The idea was to chop the land into two states, one Arab, one Jewish, and to make Jerusalem a separate, internationally run city.
The reaction to this plan could not have been more black and white. Jewish leaders, even though they weren't thrilled with the borders, they accepted it. It was a state. But Arab leaders, it was a firm, outright rejection.
So, why the rejection? Well, this quote really gets to the heart of their argument. Arab leaders felt the plan was just fundamentally unfair. They argued it gave a majority of the land to a Jewish state, even though Arabs were the demographic majority and owned most of the private land.
So you've got this rejected UN plan. The British are packing their bags to leave. The stage was set. The tension was just off the charts, and all eyes were on 1948, a year that would completely and violently reshape the entire region.
On the very day the British mandate officially expired, David Ben-Gurion stood up and declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Just hours later, armies from 5 neighboring Arab countries invaded. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War had begun.
The human cost of this war was just immense.
During all the fighting, an estimated 700,000 Palestinian Arabs either fled their homes or were expelled. They became refugees. This mass displacement is what Palestinians call the Nakba, which means catastrophe. And you really can't understand the conflict today without understanding this event.
When the fighting finally stopped in 1949, the map looked totally different from what the UN had drawn up. Israel now controlled about 77% of the land. The rest was divided up. Jordan took control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt took control of the tiny Gaza Strip. There was no independent Palestinian state.
This shaky arrangement lasted for almost 20 years, until 1967. In a really fast and decisive war, the Six-Day War, Israel captured the West Bank from Jordan, the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. And this is the moment that marks the start of Israel's military occupation of those territories.
And that brings us into our final stretch, the decades since 1967. This whole period has been defined by this cycle of peace attempts, uprisings, and a conflict that just remains unresolved.
Now, it hasn't all been conflict. There have been these real glimmers of hope. Peace treaties were actually signed between Israel and two of its neighbors, Egypt and then Jordan. And in the 1990s, it really looked like a major breakthrough was possible with a new framework for peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
This big framework was called the Oslo Accords. It created the Palestinian Authority, which was meant to give Palestinians some level of self-government in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. The ultimate goal, the big idea, was a two-state solution. But, as we now know, that whole process stalled and eventually just fell apart.
The collapse of that peace process brings us to today. And to really get what's still unresolved, it helps to zoom out one last time. So you have the ancient Israelite kingdoms, then the parade of Persian, Greek, and Roman rule, that long, stable period under the Ottomans, the crucial British Mandate era where these two nationalisms clashed, and then from 1948 until today, this era of state-building and constant conflict. It's just a staggering amount of history.
And that long history has left behind these core issues, the big questions that are still the primary roadblocks to any kind of lasting peace. We're talking about final borders, the issue of Israeli settlements, security for both sides, the incredibly sensitive status of Jerusalem, and what to do about the Palestinian refugees.
Every single one of those issues is tied directly to the history we've just walked through. And that leaves us with the big, crucial question. In a land where it feels like every stone tells a different, contested story, how does a past this long, this complicated, and this painful continue to shape the present? And what does it mean for the future?